seems like he has founded, several recycling businesses. He's now the CFO of Altogether Now PA, and he's worked extensively with helping Greenpeace and Gaia and other organizations create zero waste and city plans. So, and we are a committee of, I think we're up to 18 people, and we've been working for a couple of years on zero waste. And our one action that we've been working on for a couple of years is creating a zero waste plan for AIA, local and national. So we're kind of planning our next actions for 2022. So it's really, really great to have you here, to hear from you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. You want me to just kick right into it?
Yeah.
All right. It's nice to see everybody. I'll probably just try to keep it pretty informal. So if you want to jump in with questions, it doesn't bother me at all, or you can save them to the end, whatever works, but we can try to keep it, with the size group, we can do more of a discussion too. And I'll try to, I just kind of grabbed my favorite slides from some different presentations. So hopefully they flow together, but I'll try not to go more than like 15 or 20 minutes so that we have plenty of time to.
Should I make you the host so that you can share images?
Yes.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Let's see, multiple participants can share. So you should be able to access.
You guys can see that? All right.
Perfect.
So yeah, Marianne's introduction was I was like, oh, this sounds like a great lecture. I want to go to see that. It's always fun when you see someone else's, but I appreciate it. But yeah, my background has really been pretty steeped in operations and program designs. I think I started in 1996. So it's been about 25 years. But I started and spent about 15 years at Eureka Recycling, which is a mission-based nonprofit recycler in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. And we serve over 1 million households now with a fleet of collection vehicles and a recycling facility known as a MRF in the industry, a material recovery facility. So that's where all the material that's collected at the curb Singlestream is sorted into different commodity grades, baled up, densified, and shipped to end markets to be used as feedstocks for new products. So I was with Eureka for about 15 years. I'm still on the board of directors there as co-founder, and worked a lot on business development and policy work, working together with municipal contracts. And that's what fed a lot into the perspective that I've used today. So I'm pretty grounded in the operational side of things. I'm currently a consultant. I have a consulting firm, Nothing Left to Waste. I think I have a slide that kind of shows all the different people I'm working with, but I try to collaborate really on systems change. So not like a typical zero waste consultant that goes in and tries to figure out how you can have no waste, but really working more on the infrastructure end of things. But like Marianne said, I worked with Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, to co-write a couple of reports for them. One is the Zero Waste Master Plan that is really great. It's got a lot of great information. There are some great authors that contributed to that. That's really like a step-by-step guide on how you can implement municipal zero waste strategies. And then another report was the Tale of 5 Cities, which really looked at how plastics is a barrier to getting to zero waste. So we mapped out what % of plastics is going where from beginning to the end, and came to a lot of the conclusions that you're all familiar with. Nothing surprising, but most plastics is not recyclable, and most recyclable plastics is in the trash. I've been mostly a volunteer with Altogether Now, which is a new nonprofit founded by Judy Wicks, who's been a pioneer in localism. Founded the really pioneered farm to table restaurants in Philadelphia. And I think the most exciting thing when I moved to Pennsylvania about 5 or 6 years ago, and when I met her, it really, her vision just really clicked from a zero waste perspective, in terms that localism is really an incredible framing for zero waste. There's a lot of corporate greenwashing when it comes to waste, and to be truly sustainable, zero waste solutions need to be intersectional. They need to do more than deal with just waste at the end of the tailpipe. They need to benefit communities, not corporations. They need to create good jobs and economic development opportunities through a just transition, and they need to be reduction based across the entire supply chain. And then finally, I think, there's been this real focus on greenhouse gas emissions, which are obviously critical to our survival as a species. But I think it's really important to not just focus on greenhouse gas emissions, but also make sure that, human health emissions are addressed as well, that we're coming up with healthy and safe solutions for people. So localism is really a way to meet a lot of those goals. And altogether now currently has supply chain coalitions that are looking at local food, industrial hemp, plant medicine, and textiles. And then there's advisory groups on zero waste and renewable energy, because the idea is we don't want to create a zero waste, consumption model. That's like, let's figure out economic development that gets people to buy more stuff based on zero waste. Zero waste, we want to focus on our basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, and figure out how to do that sustainably with no waste and with renewable energy. Let's see. Oops, where am I going here? Okay, so Nothing Left to Waste, my consulting group. And we work with colleges and universities. Like I was just mentioning earlier, Delaware County just put out an amazing RFP to look at their next 10-year solid waste plan that's mandated by the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania. But Delaware County really wanted to look a lot further than the DEP requirements and figure out how to implement zero waste strategies, as well as secure long-term capacity for disposal. I've been working over the last few years with a nonprofit in Ann Arbor, Michigan called Recycle Ann Arbor. We just launched a new community-based recycling facility there. I helped PRC develop a recycled paper co-op in Western Pennsylvania, where they're working with a local mill to produce 100% post-consumer content recycled paper and then sell it locally back to the communities that are feeding the paper mill with their recycling. Then we talked about the Gaia stuff. So I'll kind of jump into my favorite slides. And this one came from a presentation someone asked me to give on, is zero waste feasible? And I truly believe that waste is inevitable. It's not, I'm sorry, waste is not inevitable, it's preventable. But to me, the important piece is that zero waste isn't about an empty trash can. That's not the measure. What we're trying to do with zero waste is have clean air, clean water, just and thriving communities. We all want a healthy planet. And while an empty trash can can certainly be a measurement towards that goal, the empty trash can isn't what I'm working for. And that's what, and it doesn't always necessarily mean you're reaching those goals. So I think everyone here is probably on the same page in terms of the dire need to address climate change. Emissions are just amazing. What's surprising to a lot of people, and maybe as architects, you're familiar with this, but our material goods that we consume in the US account for 42% of all greenhouse gas emissions in the US. So about 29% comes from the extraction, manufacturing, transport, and disposal of packaging and goods, and 13% from the supply chains of food. So between food and packaging and goods, about 42% of our emissions. So a lot of times people think about emissions in terms of buildings, like you guys do, I'm sure, in transportation. But when you look at, all of those things, manufacturing, extraction, and transportation, that all is embedded energy in the products that we're consuming. So if you reframe those into a different systems approach, it's pretty staggering in terms of the impact of less consumption. So we all are familiar with our current broken model of take, make, waste. We take material from the ground, we make it into a new product, and then we put it back into the air or water as waste. I think that if you're really not, the point of these slides are that if you're not addressing extraction, it's still a linear economy. You know, if we make our end products into some, you know, gimmicky product that brands are paying for, that's not really a solution, because we have to continue to extract resources, make them into something. And then if some of the, you know, oh, we can make our Capri Sun pouches, or we can make more plastic benches, you know, and eventually the whole world would be, you know, so overwhelmed with park benches and Capri Sun backpacks. So I think we all know that's not really a solution. The solution is really a circular economy, where the products and the resources that we consume are fed back to production and redistributed. The problem is that you know, a circular economy is often not really circular. It might be circular, potentially circular, but if we're still extracting goods to make new stuff, and we're still disposing of things that we consume, and we're still transporting all the stuff around with big trucks, it's not going to address that 42% of emissions. This was a recent report that came out a few months ago that just looked at waste characterization studies around the country. And it's clear that waste, you know, is theoretically possible. Everything we consume is reducible or recyclable. It's really just a matter of getting the right systems in place. Recycling, something I'm really committed into, and right now it's not necessarily a popular word with activists, and it's something it's sort of, the pendulum has gone back and forth, and people have really lost a lot of faith in recycling. And I won't spend a lot of time, you know, if you guys have questions about it, I can give you my perspective on what led to the crisis of recycling. But the reality is that, you know, this is a chart I put together over the summer, and the values have continued to increase, and they're sort of back here right now. In January, I think the basket value is about $110. But this, real quick, this is just, you know, when you collect a ton of material at the curb in single stream recycling, it's made up of glass, steel, aluminum, plastic, paper, and cardboard. Each of those have values. And you can see in a typical composition, you know, it's about maybe 50% or 60% paper and cardboard, 15% plastic. You know, every community has a slightly different composition, but I took kind of an average composition and took the value of those materials in the marketplace. And you can see a ton of goods right now that you're collecting at the curb is worth about $110 a ton. And most processing fees for recycling are about $80 or $85 a ton. So right now, recycling economically does work, and it shows that the material that we're collecting is in demand. That demand is increasing as more recycled minimum content mandates are passed around the country, and as brands are, you know, want to demonstrate that their products are at least accepted in recycling, for better or worse. But it has a tremendous impact, and you can see when all the negative press around recycling, when China closed their doors to imports because our recycling was so full of trash, the markets really fell off. And that was when we were really in a crisis. They were, you know, markets went down to $30 or less than $30 a ton. And at that point, you know, it's cheaper to throw it away than recycle it. But for a variety of reasons, mostly economic, you know, there's this huge opportunity to invest in domestic processing. Actually, a lot of the domestic processing has been done by Chinese companies that are now investing in domestic processing in the US because they still need that feedstock, and they can still import, you know, like pulp basically from a paper mill. They just can't import recycled paper as a raw material. So there's been billions of dollars in investments in the recycling over the last couple of years domestically, which is great because we should be dealing with it domestically. The big problem with recycling, and why recycling will never get us all the way to zero waste, it's really just a bridge strategy, is the capture rate of material, right? So even things that are completely recyclable, have good markets, good value, can be made back into a bottle to bottle, you know, all the stuff. We're hardly capturing. Most of it's in the trash. So this is for Pennsylvania on the left. We have no bottle bill. We have very little policy that promotes recycling. And you can see, you know, by commodity, how much of it actually ends up in the trash versus the recycling. So this is what's getting recycled. So PET bottles, soda bottles, 14% of them end up in the recycling. 86% of them are in the trash. You know, even the commodities that were the best on, like glass and aluminum cans, are still hardly breaking 50%. And even in California, you can see on the right, you know, one of the best recyclers in the country has a bottle bill. It doesn't get you close enough to where recycling alone is going to be the answer.
Can I ask you, Alex, you know, considering that we have like, what is it, 400 million tons or something of plastic globally. I don't remember what the US numbers are of plastic that we're producing. How does this affect the production, the extraction?
Yeah, so I mean,
like,
for sure. I mean, it's being consumed. A lot of plastic, it traditionally has been downcycled into, you know, carpeting or textiles or building materials that are, you know, low value. But there's more and more bottle to bottle recycling. And certainly I think the bottle to bottle recycling displaces the need to extract resources, if that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, I guess it's just this is like a contradiction to like movies like Plastic.
Well, yeah, so it doesn't change the fact that 90% of plastic isn't getting recycled.
Right.
And this is only, you know, PET, HDPE, and polypropylene are really the only plastics that really have robust markets. And so in the report that we did, that our recommendation was only 1, 2, and 5 plastics should be included in recycling programs, because the other plastics don't have robust markets and are likely, you know, calling it recycled is probably going someplace that's sorting through it to find the 1s, 2s, and 5s that are left in it and throwing the rest of it away.
Right.
So yeah, plastics are absolutely not sustainable. And that's what, you know, the story about plastics is what sort of, you know, ends up with throwing the baby away with the bathwater, or whatever that expression is for the other commodities that really are pretty recyclable. I mean, we could spend an hour talking about issues with each of the commodities, but I mean, recycling absolutely has a significant carbon impact right now, and it's absolutely an environmental benefit, and it's keeping things out of the incinerator that's causing cancer and asthma in you know, communities of color where they're located predominantly. So, you know, it has human health, and, you know, if you have that product at that moment of discard, you should absolutely be recycling it. But recycling is not a justification to buy it in the first place. You're better off, you know, exponentially better environmental impact not buying it in the first place. So I think the challenge is making sure people are recycling what they have right now, but not justifying unsustainable consumption because it's recyclables, which is what the brands are really trying to promote. That, oh, it's recyclable, you don't have to worry about it. But absolutely reuse, which is kind of what I go into next, is the ultimate answer to get us to zero waste is reduction through reuse, repair, and sharing. And we're seeing, you know, a lot of business development going on, as you know, you're familiar with for sure. But there's like tons and tons of, you know, and all across the country and all around the world of refill businesses and reusable businesses starting up. And some of them are really community based. Some of them have gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from venture capital funds. So, I mean, it's all over the map, but it's gotten a lot of interest, and it's growing exponentially over the past few years. It's still, you know, going to require, well, I guess first the great thing about reuse and recycling and composting, but it's like, you know, if you have this hierarchy where reduce and reduction is at the top and disposal is at the bottom, the jobs and job training benefits that you get as you move up the hierarchy are incredible. Like a repair job, you know, for per ton of things that you're repairing, you're creating 404 jobs compared to 2 jobs at a landfill or incinerator. Composting is 7 jobs, recycling is 115. So, you know, and they didn't really have data on reuse or, you know, systems, but those would create even more jobs. So, you know, that's comes back to that intersectionality piece that, you know, the best economic development and the best hopes we have for a just transition are focusing on the top of the hierarchy, not recycling and composting. And although those are very important pieces of the puzzle because they represent such a large portion of the waste stream currently. But even in Pennsylvania, like currently right now, zero waste represents about $50 billion industry with 175,000 jobs. If you look at not only the collection and processing of that material, but the manufacturers that are using the feedstock. But this is what I was going to get into too on your question is, you know, the policy, this isn't going to happen voluntarily. It's been, you know, 30 years. We've seen the industry, you know, recycling hasn't reached the levels that they ever expected. And it's by design, it's really not capable of reaching the levels that would be required to make it work. So we need policy, and that policy has to promote reuse over recycling and phase out single-use plastics for better alternatives. You know, we can get into the mechanisms if you're interested, but, you know, extended producer responsibility is the most important one, where it shifts the accountability from the consumer to the producer, who's ultimately responsible. Because, you know, especially in the case of plastics, I think there's an article in the Atlantic just last week that did a great job describing that, you know, plastics packaging isn't coming from demand from consumers. It's coming from the way the fossil fuel industry profits off of the material that they're extracting. So we really need to hold the manufacturers responsible if we're going to get any headway on it. The other important thing I wanted to point out is, you know, being aware of false solutions that come up continuously, but things like incineration. Pennsylvania just passed HB 1808, which is advanced recycling bill that, you know, codifies pyrolysis and gasification as a viable alternative for non-recyclable plastics, which is really problematic. Recovery, you know, anything that calling about recovery or waste conversion, really we need to move away from combustion, in this idea that, you know, we can pull fossil fuels out of the ground, making them into a plastic bottle, use it for 10 minutes, and then burn it and call it renewable. It is just ridiculous. You know, marketing driven solutions are sort of what I was showing you with the plastic benches or the TerraCycle backpacks, you know, where these brands get a lot of mileage out of the promotion that a very tiny percent of their materials are actually getting made into something new, but it's not really going back and displacing the materials that they're counting on to make new solutions. Then obviously any solution needs to be, you know, a just and equitable solution that isn't on the backs of low income communities or communities of color. So I think the final thing I want to say is just, you know, zero waste is a journey and not a destination. It's really cheesy, but there's such a lack of services in the marketplace and a lack of infrastructure right now that, you know, it puts the onus on us to really work to develop that new infrastructure and not just do what's best in the marketplace, but really keep pushing forward, because we're left with the decisions that, you know, people made 30 years ago. And we need to think, you know, it's challenging and it's tough, but the decisions we make today are going to, you know, impact what's available to people in the next 30 years. Because a lot of the infrastructure we're talking about is hundreds of $1 million investment. You know, an incinerator you build and it lasts for, you know, well, the incinerator in Chester's, I think 30 or 35 years old now. And you know, the economics of it, once you build it, you need to keep that material coming through to make it sustainable. So as we move forward, we really have to think carefully about what infrastructure are we investing in and try to get a better balance of, you know, if we looked proportionally how much we invest in disposal and then say, well, we're doing a horrible job on reduction, but we're not vesting anything in reduction. So I think, yeah, that's my main slides. I kind of went through quick, and I meant to put some stuff in on deconstruction. I'll just tell you one quick story on deconstruction. I'm working with Recycle Ann Arbor. They have a C&D recycler like Revolution Recovery, if you've ever been to that facility, which they're awesome. But yeah, they take construction waste. And what we're trying to do right now is really target that whole supply chain and say, okay, we need to have deconstruction teams out there first, pulling out the valuable architectural salvage, sell that so people don't have to buy new materials to build new stuff. So pull that out first, then have the recycling options for the stuff that's just not salvageable. And then as the next step, work with like a hempcrete producer or something more sustainable, so that material in the future is compostable or reusable, and so that you're actually ending the cycle that we're going to continuously count on recycling going forward. So really looking at the whole supply chain from beginning to end, I think is the way to do it, rather than material by material, because a material can be used in, you know, a dozen different supply chains, and you're not going to find, if you want to find just one solution, it's going to end up being recycling, which is kind of the lowest common denominator. But if you look at it from the supply chain, you can really kind of go in there, figure out, you know, why are we doing it in the first place? And especially with local supply chains where stuff isn't getting shipped all around the world, and you know, it creates these huge opportunities to deal with it in your own community.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
thank you.
too fast. Yeah.
No, that was really awesome. I had one question about, you had mentioned that at Altogether Now PA, you have this sort of, you know, way of working where no zero waste, you called it a no zero waste consumption model, which was really interesting. So you don't need zero waste because it's sort of in the whole program.
Everything needs to be, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we started out with like, okay, we're gonna have all these working groups that are gonna each address a different supply chain. And the more I thought about it, it just felt like, you know, well, what's a zero waste supply chain on its own? You know, like, and then are we pushing people to buy stuff just because they think it's like, you know, are we going to buy our way out of zero waste? It's like, consuming isn't ever going to solve our zero waste issues. And the same thing with energy. It's like, you know, renewable energy is amazing, but we still want to use as little of it as possible. So I think there's sometimes these models end up getting perversely structured so that you're actually, you know, the best zero waste system is just
no waste,
no consumption at all. And it's like, so, which obviously, you know, we need to consume. And so if you can consume sustainably and just do everything we're doing with minimal waste, and just think of it more like an infrastructure system rather than a whole separate supply chain. I think that's the way to go. And I will say the one other thing on Altogether Now is, you know, it's been mostly a volunteer driven group to date. There's currently a job opening for the executive director. And so I think over the next few weeks, or maybe in like 6 weeks or so, an executive director should be on. And I think there's going to be tremendous opportunity there. It'll be more visible, and definitely interested in working with you all on construction waste and building materials. I think it kind of, and that's like an example too, it overlaps, you know, all of these different groups.
Well, I really liked one of the points that you made, how a lot of plastics get downcycled, but then they get downcycled into building materials. And I just wasn't sure, because I'm one of the younger members on the committee, would LEED and those sorts of systems support that? Because, oh, it's recyclable, it's good, you get points for that sort of thing. And really it's contributing then to an unsustainable cycle. And the question of like, how can you fix that? Because the waste is already there. So what do you do with it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I mean, that is something I grapple with a lot, is, you know, the waste is already there, right? So we need to do something with it. And I think it comes back to that idea that we need to do something with it, but we can't invest millions of dollars that's going to perpetuate or compete with reduction, I guess, is the key. So how do we, this transition period, which is when I think we're relying a lot on recycling, is how do you do it in a way that gets us through this transition, but doesn't compete with the ability to go further? So yeah, if we're gonna like put, melt plastic into concrete or something and just embed it in building, like it's gonna compete with real solutions of reuse potentially when it comes down to cost, if you're actually building that infrastructure. I think, on the LEED certifications credit, the same, US Green Building Council has a true certification for zero waste, and it's actually really good. I'm true certified by the Green Building Council, and I thought it was a really worthwhile program, and they really do focus on reduction and reuse. I don't know if anyone else has done that program.
Someone, one of the newer employees at our office is a true advisor, and to be honest, when she started, it was the first time I had ever heard of it.
Yeah.
So I don't really know much
heard of it
about
before
it,
either.
but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, you should check it out on their website. There's a lot of information, I think that's really important feedback, is that your customers aren't demanding it, right, or know it even exists probably.
And I mean, and to be perfectly honest, I work at a firm that specializes in sustainability. So I'm surprised I haven't heard more about it.
Yeah. And it does like sort of, I don't know how much architects would be involved, because it's more about how you're operating that building after it's built than what would be involved in the beginning.
Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So it's like you need to document that you have 90% diversion or reduction, and that you work in all these, you get points. It's just like LEED, I think you can get platinum or gold or all these different certifications for doing different zero waste stuff. But to answer, your original question, I wonder how they deal. I'd have to go back and look, because they definitely give points for using recycled content materials, and I would, encourage that too. But at some point, is recycled
when does it become
actually
greenwashing?
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can do some of that with maybe LC life cycle analysis, and what material are you really displacing with this? Are you just really trying to find a home for something versus actually manage the upstream extraction impacts? It's a really important question.
Yeah, it's not unlike this. People have had that discussion about slag and fly ash, which are byproducts of coal-fired power plants that you can use in concrete, and it's admirable. But are we in, and I guess you'd say, while it still exists, should we use it, or are we building our future on the perpetuation of this upstream process that we're trying to stop?
Yeah.
That's really.
Well, I have a question then, is if you incorporate it into buildings now and deconstruct them later, how does that affect that process?
I think that's
a good question.
Yeah, good question, especially with toxic material, right?
Yeah.
Is it?
Well, it's like
leaching
lead
into the
and all
ground?
that in old buildings.
Yeah. It's not healthy. I wouldn't want to be in a building that had all this recycled plastic. It's, I think it comes to that human health issue. I have one question actually for you all too, because you'd be perfect, but are you familiar with aero aggregates? That's doing,
Yeah, we've actually had them, they sponsored us a few years ago, and we've been trying to plan a visit to them for like a year and a half. The pandemic really shut us down, but yeah, they're really great.
Yeah, we actually use them on projects. Actually, I just had a project, a pretty big educational project that we used it as under slab insulation instead of just using gravel. We used that, and then my company is renovating our offices, and we poured a new slab downstairs, and we also use that as under slab. So we're a huge proponent of them and try to use it, wherever we
cool.
can. It's a really, really awesome product. And yeah, a tour of their facility would be awesome because they're so local to us.
Yeah, they're right in Eddystone. I
Yeah.
toured the facility. Yeah, it's really impressive, and the products there. And I think, and it's great to hear this because I don't know that much about the benefits of what that, what the impact is of using that on compared to the alternatives.
Yeah, they have, I mean, understandably, I think their biggest market is civil and stuff for like roadway projects. That seems to be their biggest market. But, we see a lot of value in it because it's such a light material. So when they're transporting it, that's less carbon because you have to make less trips. And then it's, replacing insulation too. So instead of having to do insulation and gravel under the slab, we're doing it all in one product and it's insulating. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And it's not going into the landfill. Which is
Right.
Yeah,
really-
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's a lot of facilities that are collecting glass bottles, at least in Pennsylvania. I think all of the facilities, for Philly and in suburbs are using glass as alternative daily cover on the landfill, which is, I don't know how you distinguish the difference between spreading it on top of a landfill every day and then putting more trash and just putting it in a landfill. It's avoiding their need to put, dirt on top of a landfill, but it doesn't obviously have, it's total greenwashing that the state even allows that to be counted as a beneficial use. They should really be putting pressure on the MRFs to have to go to someone like Aero Aggregates. But even when you look at Aero, there's this concept of highest and best use for the materials we're collecting, and traditionally I've always believed that the highest and best use is going back to a bottle, right? And the glass bottle manufacturers save tremendous amount of energy when they can melt a glass bottle back into a bottle rather than have to start from sand. And glass is infinitely renewable. You could do that over and over again without any yield loss. So it's like you have this great project with Aero Aggregates, but is it competing against bottle to bottle recycling? And at the end of the day, what we really want is refillable glass bottles with a bottle bill. And what would that do to so it's now Aero Aggregates in this position where they're going to lobby against a bottle bill because they'll lose some of their glass supply. It gets really complicated when you start looking at, well, this is better than this, but what's it doing?
Alex, did I think you were probably working in the industry when the transition from multiple stream to single stream happened. Do you have any understanding of the data on like how much is lost because of that? And because what I understand about bottles, because we have spoken with Bottle Underground and they're just like, they have rooms and rooms full of bottles just waiting to be like used for something. And it's really heartbreaking that we're losing all this, this important material. And so, but I understand that the color issue is the problem, right? Because everything comes in different colors and so what are your...
So when I started in recycling, we were actually collecting, I think 11 sorts at the curb. And the drivers, the residents didn't have to sort it into 11 sorts, but the drivers actually sorted glass by color into 3 different compartments on this old fashioned trailer. I used to have a slide about this. But it was like a truck pulling a trailer that you guys probably remember with these metal cages, and the work comp rates were ridiculous because it wasn't healthy or sustainable really for the people collecting it. It was a pretty rough job. So that, Eureka actually started with that. Then we went to 2-stream collection where bottles and cans were in one compartment and paper was in the other. With that 12 sort system, you're basically, the great part about it is you're not collecting, the drivers are basically like touching everything. So you leave behind non-recyclable products with a tag that said, this isn't recyclable in the blue bin, and people could learn what's recyclable. When we went to the carts and automated collection, then the drivers aren't even seeing what's in there anymore. And you kind of lose that feedback directly to the resident. And that's what kind of led to more and more contamination ending up in the cart. And then once we started exporting everything to China that was so hungry for material and they had such a high tolerance for contamination, then the feedback to the MRF even got lost. So it's like, there was no feedback system in terms of quality going back to the resident at that point. But, we did a big study. I could send it to you, but it was from like 2001. But we did a 14-month pilot of single stream, dual stream. And then we looked at in source separated, and then we looked at dual stream in 2 carts as well, because a lot of what we thought was the more capacity you have to recycle, the more you'll recycle. And that single stream wasn't really about the fact that people didn't want to sort. It was about the fact that they got this cart and they could recycle more. And that's what our data showed. But the problem was cities couldn't afford to buy 2 carts for everyone, and the cost of collection was a lot higher. So at the end of the day, when we compared just 2-stream and single stream, the residual rate went up higher, but the net amount of recycling collected actually went up with single stream because more people participated and people recycled more.
Right.
But like Eureka right now and Recycling Ann Arbor are both single stream, and they have less than 10% residual rates because they're nonprofit mission-driven organizations that spend a lot of money on education, compared to like a for-profit waste hauler that we think, waste management is going to have our best interests for the environment in mind. They'll do what you ask them to do, but you can't count on a corporation to be your champion of the environmental impact. So they're the ones that pushed single stream for
I guess the landfill has to be really, really expensive, right? We have to put a price on that waste.
So in Minnesota, the county was taxing, or the state, between the state and the county were both taxing disposal. It was like 68 or 70% tax on landfilling. And then they used that money to support diversion programs, which was really great. Yeah.
Well, it looks like our time is almost up.
Yeah, I can probably, if people have more questions, I can probably say another 5.
Okay.
Or so.
Thank you.
Or if we're sad too. And people are welcome to email as well.
Yeah, there's so much that we could ask you about. So, but yeah, I think I would love to see your study on, single stream versus dual stream versus 11. It seems really, really interesting, because I think as a society, if we're going to be zero waste, we're going to have to move back to something like that. Either that or our reusables will be picked up, by the, well, just like we have, Circle Compost in Bennett, and they pick up, home composting. And I think the city there's some kind of a program. Are you aware of anything that's happening city-wise with, Yeah,
they're piloting. They have the community compost sites at the rec centers.
Right.
Yeah. And then media in Delaware County is gone curb. They did a pilot, and they're fully launched curbside composting for every household, I think, that wants to participate.
Wow.
Alex, will you be sharing slides, PDFs of your slides? Somebody asked in the group chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can email that to you.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
No problem.
At the risk of showing up late and asking questions you may have answered before I got here, I have a question generally about, do you know of, or do you have studies about reusables? I feel like in a lot of the projects that I work on, our clients are often, if there is food service in the project, they want to know, should we do disposables or reusables? Because they look at it and say, well, I don't need to buy all that dishwashing equipment, and I don't need to hire someone to wash dishes, and I don't need to run that. And I keep saying, well, but studies have shown this and that, and the studies I have are sort of old, and I don't know if you have more resources available to lobby for reusables and instead of disposables, because there's a lot. It's impossible to get away from. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's. It's a great question. I think there's a lot of great information, and Mary Ann probably has access to it too. But like Upstream is a really great national organization focusing on promoting reusables, and they've done a bunch of reports that look into the whole water costs and energy costs and production costs of the reusables, and it's hands down. I mean, it's exponentially
Cheaper,
better.
yeah. It's even the cost of the plastic, you know, whatever that is that you're throwing away. There's like a huge payoff. And to hire someone to do the washing it's a 1 hour in an office.
Yeah.
It's like 1 hours of work. So there's a tremendous savings on the
Yeah.
long term.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, let's do the right thing. The right thing for them is the bottom line of how much it costs.
Yeah. And you come
Yeah.
back to that job and economic development opportunities, and you think about it, it's a huge opportunity to create all these new businesses and create all these new jobs.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll be in touch. And if you have any thoughts about, as you know, in the next week or whatever, if you have any thoughts about how we can contribute to this coalition that the coalitions that you're building, the circular coalition, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think it'd be awesome to get you all involved in all together now because of that whole building materials and waste issues, and I think it overlaps a lot of it. So
yeah,
I think once the new executive director comes on,
wonderful. All right, great.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for
Thank you for coming. It was
This
a
was
great
great.
presentation.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm going to pause the recording component now.